Thank you, Jerry. This is a fantastic group. I'm so glad all of us are here to support this foundation. What I wanted to do is I wanted to talk about what will happen in the next decade, in particular about how so many new people will join the conversation that we're part of. Last year, the population of the world reached a new record of 7 billion, but the number of people who are online is still roughly 2 billion, and just 1 billion of those people in the world have smartphones. So the World Wide Web, which we're so proud of, has yet to live up to its name. So imagine how much better the web would be with another 5 billion people online. More innovation, right? More creativity, more opportunity. And the past decade has taught us that if you connect people with information, they will change the world. As technology develops, however, in my view, a new kind of digital divide will emerge. In this next decade, we'll see the emergence of 3 distinct groups, differentiated mainly by connectivity. Let me talk about the first group. This first group is ultra-connected people. Pretty much everybody here, right? It's hard for us to stay off of our smartphones, BlackBerries, and what have you. We work for organizations with the will and the resources to embrace the cutting edge of technology. For the most part, we started with huge advantages in life: a good education, economic prosperity, a democratic government here, a lucky birth. For this group, the future is prescribed only by the limits of what science can deliver and society deems ethical. And it will look a lot like science fiction. So the people who predict that intelligent robots and virtual reality and self-driving cars will soon be commonplace are right. In fact, Google's driverless cars, not to mention something, have already traveled 200,000 miles in states like Nevada, Florida, and California, are now changing the law to make this possible. It's real. Now, the technological advances that will redefine the way we live, the way we interact with each other, but the ultimate achievement in this future is that this technology will actually disappear. Now, I don't mean technology will become less relevant. I mean it will become part of everyday life. People will have to spend less time getting technology to work, worrying which cables work with which computers. All of us spend a lot of time doing this. Or where's our content stored? Because it will all be seamless. It will just be there. The web will be everything. It will be nothing. It will be like electricity. First group. Second group. Now, just below this first group, this privileged few, is another much larger community, the connected contributors. This is a generation who grew up with increasingly sophisticated technology as part of their daily lives and equipped with the skills and digital literacy to use them. But they're also in the middle class, without the same level of technology as this privileged few. And this new technology will still give the connected contributors new ways to exchange information. A good example, holopresence technology. Can allow you to experience events in remote areas, in remote places as if you were there. Phones will be connected in meshes of high-speed links for sharing everything, beaming information from phone to phone. So being invested in the common spaces of the web, this group, these connected contributors, will speak with a loud voice to defend those shared spaces, if you will, from attacks of freedom and of expression and basic rights, the things we care so much about. They're going to force into the open actions that would otherwise remain hidden. Their tools, speak-to-tweet, Ushahidi, quickly designed to deal with extreme circumstances and crises, they're perfect examples. Developers, in this sense, are engineers of our human freedom. By combining a passion for this, they create tools that are used by dissidents and activists all over the world to overcome government restrictions and barriers to freedom. I've always believed that the web is more than a network of machines. It's a network of minds that is evolving into a sort of a collective intelligence and a global conscience. I'm very proud of this. Look at the way that people came together last year to help victims of the Japanese earthquake. There'll be no barriers to our imagination or our compassion. That's the second group. But there's a much larger group still coming. Think of these, it's still a minority, right? This next future, this next 5 billion, is going to be very interesting. In communities all over the world, there are only pockets of connectivity, digital oases in online deserts. These are people who don't have local data centers, or they don't even have copper wires in the ground. So as data access arrives at scale among this third group, they're skipping dial-up modems, DSL lines, and broadband, and they're going straight to mobile devices. So imagine in the future, the poor of the world will have a supercomputer and a really smart sidekick all rolled into one in their phone. Today, we've already seen smartphones successfully converted into microscopes and spectrometers to provide in-field and scientific capabilities in places that have no electric power at all. In 2020, the same devices will be able to diagnose medical conditions, detect environmental hazards, and all the things that people care about. 4G technology and something called mesh networking will provide the data connections for all of these new devices and allow the deployment of these wireless networks in the most remote regions of the world, well beyond the reach of large-scale data centers and fixed-line infrastructure. So in this model, the network becomes a digital watering hole where people sort of meet and they hang out. And every village will have an internet cafe for people to connect, to talk to each other. Now, no one is suggesting, and I want to be clear here, that this technology is going to suddenly transform the social, political, and economic conditions of communities. Technology does not produce miracles. But connectivity, even modest amounts, changes lives. So in times of war and suffering, it'll be impossible to ignore the voices that cry out for help. Now think about the extraordinary pictures that come out of Syria every day, Assad's brutality on display for all of us to see. And propaganda will also be harder to sell to the public. When the Chinese government tried to curb the reporting of a high-speed train crash last year, they were widely ridiculed by the Chinese web users, in spite of a very sophisticated censorship system in China. So with information comes power, and with power comes choice. Smarter, resourceful citizens, they'll demand a much better deal for their communities, more ethical and responsible behavior from all of us. Pretty good. What are some of the problems? Well, this world does not quite yet exist, and there are going to be some obstacles. The internet is not a utopia. It reflects humanity, the good and as well as the bad. So I worry about three things that I wanted to sort of briefly mention. The first is that the internet was built without criminals in mind. When we built the internet, we didn't think they were going to show up. I mean, honestly, I helped, I know. And while it's getting more, I mean, you know, we were like in graduate school, right? There's no criminals there. So while it's getting to be more and more secure, the inherent vulnerabilities in our design will exist for at least another decade. So fixing this problem is a huge task. And except for military networks, every single node on the web that is connected will need to be upgraded with new technologies that are being developed now. And while threats come from individuals and even groups of people, the biggest problem is going to be activities stemming from nations that seek to do harm to others. It's very difficult to identify the source of cybercriminality and stop it. Problem number one. Problem number two, the fact that there's no delete button on the internet forces some very difficult public policy choices that we'd never really imagined. Much of the existing privacy debate centers on the tension between the public's right to know and the very important right of individual privacy. So you have a situation where a false accusation in your youth used to fade away, but now it can remain forever. I certainly hope that ranking and other things like that will emerge that distinguish between truth and falsehood. It would allow people, for example, to start over on a new footing. And finally, I worry about governments filtering information they fear or they prohibit. It's easy to see their logic, but where does the line get drawn? Last year, we saw in Egypt what happened when a government tried to turn off the internet. Now, smarter, many governments are trying to build their own walled internet, a balkanized web in which you and I do not see the same information and no one knows what's been censored. Not only does filtering not work, it creates dark places where hate and radicalism and crime can flourish. It's much better to find and stop the criminal rather than merely block his or her webpage. Now, filtering technology, which obviously I don't like, will inevitably become more effective, and we face the very real possibility that we could end up living in a society in which software silently deletes our voices, our thoughts, and our culture. So addressing these challenges, and I want to conclude by saying that this is going to be tough, but this is a worthwhile struggle. It really is. And I firmly believe that technology will ultimately be a force for good here. In the next decade, we're going to see a new generation of technology that will extend the frontiers of human existence in society. Through the internet, we have a chance to build a truly inclusive global community, and technology will be a great leveler. There will still be elites, but they won't have a monopoly on progress and opportunity. The weak will be made strong, and those with nothing shall have something. I'm very proud of this, and we should all be. And technology is necessary but not sufficient. Some governments are going to try to fight this transition and use technology to suppress and not enhance access to information. And I think they'll fail. The internet and technology are like water. They'll find a way through this. No system of censorship can ever be absolute. There will always be chinks which clever, artful citizens will use to find information, organize, and break through. As you all know, the truth really will win out. The future can be delayed, but it cannot be denied. Let us resolve right now, as leaders and journalists, I think everybody here would agree, that we need to get there faster and to fight for a future where everyone has a chance to be connected and that information is the birthright of everyone, all peoples everywhere. This will be a tough fight, but it's a long one. But this is a struggle to believe, essentially to achieve the highest principles and greatest qualities of society. The quest for the inalienable rights that has driven all of us, especially people here in this room, and let us all literally here as part of this wonderful foundation. In this century, we all have a part to play connecting the world. We'll free the world. Thank you so very, very much. And I think we have time for a couple questions.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
We get the house lights up.
Yeah, maybe we could have comments or questions on this or anything else. We do have 1,000 journalists in the room. And I assume we're on the record.
Yes.
Just kidding.
There's some microphones in this center aisle.
Hi.
Okay, go ahead.
Hi, it's Marilyn G. Wax with NPR. Today I saw a study that showed that content is not king. A lot of people who, as they move to mobile, are spending all of their time on games and social media, just talking to friends. Is there anything we can do to get people more engaged in content so that as we move into this more mobile future, we're getting the eyeballs on the news and not just on Angry Birds?
We love Angry Birds too. If you think about your children, from the moment they're awake to the moment they're asleep, they're online now. This should be of concern. And I think the reality is that this is going to be addressed, your point, which I think is very well taken, it's going to be addressed by new forms of content. There's a lot of evidence that the gaming paradigms are really part of a new way of learning, and that games, in fact, have produced some very, very stellar educational opportunities, just not about the right things. So I believe that over the next few years, you're going to see a whole new generation of information services and opportunities that will be targeted exactly at the issue that you're raising. I am concerned, and I want to be clear here, that this sort of interrupt-driven world that we've all built, and I certainly have my part in that, is sort of taking us away from what I'm going to call deep reading and deep thinking, and we need to fight for that. And probably the best way for us to fight that is to invest more and more in education at every level, right? Because ultimately learning how to read, learning how to think, and so forth is really related to that, and that's never going to go away.
Take the question from the closest
Yeah, go ahead. Yes, sir.
Hi, Jeremy Arp with C-SPAN. We're broadcasting this live on C-SPAN 2 right now. And,
thank you.
You bet. I'm wondering about Google Plus, not for all users, but mainly for media here in Washington. What is Google's goal for Google Plus for the media? How can we use it? And what do you hope we can do with it?
From the standpoint of audience building, Google Plus has on the order of 100 million users these days, and it's a credible alternative to getting your message out. In my case, I use Google Plus to talk about the things that I've been doing. And what's interesting, because of its authentication and the way it does naming and other technical matters, I get better and more informed comments than I do on anything else. So it looks to me like at least Google Plus has started with people who are pretty passionate, who pay a lot of attention, and who really do talk to each other. So that would be, I think, probably a differentiator that would serve us well. You should do the others as well. In other words, you don't just pick one. I think you should talk to all the audiences. There are a lot of things we're doing at Google Plus to make it more interesting. The most successful piece of Google Plus is now something called Hangouts, which are where groups of people have sort of an ad hoc video network. If I were a broadcaster here, I'd try to figure out a way to do Hangouts with my fans and do them quickly and have them scale. Those are probably the two things I'd do.
Last question, please, from the far mic.
Hi, Roe Ruttenberg from China Central Television from CCTV News. You'd mentioned the world's population of 7 billion. Obviously, about a fifth of that lives in China, and you made some comments about censorship in China. I'm wondering if you could address the role that you think the Chinese population will play in the integration of the World Wide Web. Will there be parallel, partial World Wide Webs? How do you see China becoming a part of that?
We don't know China's future web plans because they certainly don't tell anybody, and they're not going to tell Google. on the list, we're not on the phone call list. Technically, the way the internet works in China is that there's something called the Great Firewall, which is a series of proxies which actually censor content by looking at what is called, using something called deep packet inspection. They literally look at the packets to see if prohibited words and so forth are going through, and they do this for all information services. It's also the case in China that if you run a site where you publish information which is on an actively policed censorship list, you're ordered to take it down and to do so pretty brutally, and it's under a threat of criminal prosecution. So it's active censorship at its worst. And of course, Google doesn't like this. The next thing that China can do is they can begin to close off access to all the sites, not just part of the information, but to do so would expose their censorship more directly to their citizens, and they run the risk of annoying their citizens more than they already have. So my guess is that they're going to go down this very, very tight censorship model where they're actively prosecuting bloggers using very broad things, but not shut down the entire internet. We don't know how far they'll go as information seeps into the country. The more they shut off that barrier, the more they hurt themselves. Because one of the things we learned about the internet is if you want to run a global economy, you need access to what's going on in other countries. We are critically dependent upon that. And the countries that have tried to shut down the internet because they hate it, because it's a source of free information, et cetera, ultimately discover they can't run their countries without it. So I hope that the internet will sort of stay there in at least a partially transparent form. And my eventual hope is that the citizens will say enough is enough. We really want free speech. Thank you so much.
Good.